getting that started.
Yeah.
Going to resume recording as well.
Hello, everyone. It's about 3 minutes away from us going live, not on the air, but in our evening conversation about the retail cannabis in Altona. It's 6:57. We'll get underway just around 7 o'clock. And in the meantime, thank you for listening. Well, that awkward silence is over. Hello and welcome to a conversation about cannabis. Thank you for joining us virtually as we are unable to meet together in person. Hello to those of you in the multi-purpose room at Gardens on 10th. We had heard that you may be showing the stream there, so hello. And as we get ready to get started, I want to urge you to share the video with your friends and family. Invite them to join us in the discussion. If you have questions, please feel free to type them into the comment section, and we will get to as many as we are able. In the event that you're not able to watch the entire conversation now or later, it will be recorded and available again. So details on that later and throughout the evening. We have invited a number of people to participate in today's discussion, including those who circulated the petition calling for the plebiscite. Unfortunately, they have chosen not to attend. We are looking forward to tonight's discussion, so let me take a moment to introduce those who are on the call. We have Chief Administrative Officer Dan Gagné, who is here to answer questions about how and where you can vote and voter eligibility. Thanks for the wave, Dan. We have Altona Police Chief Perry Batchelor, who serves our community as the Chief of Altona Police Service. We look forward to some words from Perry about the law enforcement perspective on a licensed retail cannabis store. We're also joined today by Jehna Grobety, who is the Manager of Training and Education at Delta 9 Cannabis. She has worked in the cannabis industry for 5 years, first as a customer service representative, and then educating patients in Delta 9's clinic. She says that her research into cannabis and its many uses has fueled a passion for the plant and all that it has to offer. And as a mother of 4, she feels that education is the key component in using cannabis in a responsible way. In her current position as Manager of Training and Education, she feels she has a unique opportunity to reduce the stigma surrounding cannabis use and to reduce the harm of cannabis prohibition. We also have our Communications Officer, Sarah Radmore, in the call, who will be ensuring that the live stream is running smoothly and will relay your questions and comments. And finally, I'm Mayor Al Friesen, and I will serve as tonight's moderator and host for this conversation about cannabis. Well, let's start, they say, as the very beginning. Now, cannabis was legalized across Canada in October 2018 under the Cannabis Act. In Manitoba, the laws around cannabis are governed by the Liquor, Gaming, and Cannabis Control Act. The provincial legislation allowed for municipalities to hold a plebiscite to prohibit the local sale of cannabis. There are 2 different ways that a plebiscite could be called. First, the elected council could call for a plebiscite. In 2018, 8 municipalities across Manitoba held plebiscites on cannabis, including Winkler and Steinbach. Town of Altona Council was of the opinion in 2018 and continues to have the same opinion that we are not opposed to a retail cannabis store in Altona. Here's why. We heard from Altona residents that we should encourage growth, support job creation efforts, and create a climate to fill empty retail operations. A licensed retail cannabis store in Altona would mean investment in empty retail space, more local jobs, and an increase to the tax base. All things that support our local economy. We also know that cannabis is already being consumed in our community from a variety of sources, some of which are black market, unregulated, illegal, and potentially unsafe. A licensed retail cannabis store would provide a regulated, safe source of cannabis for those who wish to consume it. Cannabis is a heavily regulated substance, just like alcohol and tobacco, and so we were not and are not opposed to the legal side of it in our community. Well, the second way the plebiscite can be called under the legislation is for a petition with signatures from at least 20% of eligible voters calling for the vote to be presented to council. In 2018, when cannabis was legalized, no such petition was presented. The province of Manitoba set a goal that within 2 years of legalization, 90% of Manitobans should be able to access legal cannabis within a 30-minute drive or less. In March of 2019, town of Altona was announced to be one of 7 rural communities approved for a cannabis retail store as part of that plan to extend the legal distribution of the product. The prospective retailer spent time finding the right place for the store and applied for conditional use of a space downtown. In order to set up shop in their desired location, this application led to a public hearing on October 22nd, 2019, and council approved the conditional use. Soon after that public hearing occurred, a petition was circulated in Altona calling for a plebiscite on retail cannabis. The petition was deemed sufficient and presented to council on February 25th, 2020, at which point the plebiscite date was set. While that prospective retailer has since redirected their business focus, the question is still at hand and needs to be addressed. All of that is what led us here today, about a month before our scheduled vote, to talk about cannabis. Remember, the question at hand is not whether cannabis should or should not be legal. That was settled federally 2 years ago. The question at hand, the question on the ballot, is should licensed retail cannabis stores be allowed in Altona? We'll turn attention over to our panel, and to start, who gets to say yes and who gets to say no, and how does that process work? Dan Gagné, our CAO, will talk about voter eligibility, voter registration, and the different ways to vote. So Dan, if you could, please.
Hey, thanks, Al. Yeah, so in order to be eligible to vote, a person has to be at least 18 years old, has to be a Canadian citizen, and has to either be a resident of the town of Altona for at least 6 months prior to October 14th, or be the actual registered owner of property in the town of Altona for at least a 6-month period prior to the voting day of October 14th. Adult students, people who are temporarily absent from the town of Altona, such as students who are maybe going to Winnipeg for university, or are members who, with COVID now it probably doesn't apply, but are away for extended vacation. They are also eligible to vote, provided that they haven't established permanent residency elsewhere to the point where they've been added to the electors roll somewhere else in another municipality. So there are small exceptions to the rule. You don't actually have to be residing in Altona, but if this is your permanent residence in Altona, you must have lived here for at least 6 months prior to October 14th. So to make sure that you are on the electors roll when you show up at the poll on October 14th, you should check in at the town office by calling or coming in person, making sure you are on the voters list. We do update the voters list periodically in between elections, just to make sure that we have an accurate list, so that when election time comes around, we have a good list. But just in case, you may want to check, especially if you've moved recently from one area of town to another, or you're new to the community, or you've just turned 18, you may want to check in to make sure that you are on the voters list. Also, for newcomers, if you've just achieved your Canadian citizenship, call in and add your name to the voters list. So, and you can do that online. We have a facility to do that online, but like I said, probably the easiest way is to just call in. You may think you are on the list, but it's just a good idea to just double check. So when you are confirmed on the voters list and it's time to vote, you will have 4 different options. So the traditional option is to show up at the polls on October 14th. The polls will be open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. at the Rhineland Pioneer Center, 227 10th Avenue Northwest, beside the Millennium Exhibition Center. You do require identification to vote. You'll just need to show one piece of government ID with photo ID, or at least 2 other documents that provide proof of identity and also prove your mailing address, or your residential address is in Altona. Due to the ongoing threat of COVID-19, there will be some physical distancing measures put in place at the poll location. We will have some hand sanitizer available, and masks will be strongly encouraged to be used. We will have a small supply of disposable masks for those who forget and prefer to have a mask on. It's just for your own protection and for protecting the poll clerks who will be spending most of their day meeting and helping out a lot of people at the polls. You're also welcome to bring your own pencil if you prefer to mark the ballot. But like I said, we will try to, accommodate all voters with a safe environment that day. There will be mobile polls established throughout the community just to accommodate persons who are qualified to vote, but either reside in a healthcare facility or it's just a way of reaching the people who are not as mobile as others. So on the day of October 14th, there will be several set up throughout the community. We have 9 set up. If you go to our website, those locations are indicated. And there are certain hours of the day where you will have an opportunity to vote in your location. So those locations are Gardens on 10th, Eastview Place, the Buffalo Apartments, the Poplars, Center Courts, Center Point Plaza, Katarina Courts, Wheatland Estates, and Pineview Manor. These polls are subject to change if the public health orders restrict certain access to certain locations. We may have to cancel the locations, and those will be announced and advertised within those buildings. We have set up posters in all of these facilities, so if they were to be canceled, the option would be to sign up for a mail-in ballot, and that's something we can talk about in a few minutes here. The other option is to vote in advance on October 8th. There will be a voting location open in the Altona Civic Center from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Again, identification will be required. Piece of ID showing your identity and providing your residential address. Again, we will have physical distancing and hand hygiene measures in place. We will encourage masks again, and we will have a supply of disposable masks in case you forget to bring. And again, also welcome to bring your own pencil if you prefer to use your own pencil. So the final option, if you're not comfortable with attending a physical location to vote, is to vote by sealed ballot. You may register to do so until October 11th. So a voter who's unable to go in person or for this year because of COVID, there may be some of those who are hesitant to attend the location. You may do so by applying in person here at the office. Starting tomorrow, you can apply for a sealed ballot. And if you appear in person, we can give you the ballot immediately. You can fill it out, you can hand it in. We will put it into a polling box immediately. If you apply for it in writing, either by email, mail, or fax to our office, we will mail that to you. And we can mail ballots out. We will mail ballots out if applied in writing. We will mail them out until October 2nd. After October 2nd, there's not enough time between registering for a sealed ballot and providing it to the senior election officer to have your vote counted. So you would have to make alternative arrangements for delivery of the ballot to you and for it to be returned to the senior election officials. So those are your options. There's 4 different options. I think, especially with this year, we're trying to be as accommodating, as flexible as possible. Our main goal is to get as many people to vote on this. This is an important community question, and voter turnout is essential. It's an essential part of this process. It's not worth going through this exercise if everybody doesn't get a say. So we encourage everybody to come out and vote. And there's several ways of doing so.
Thank you, Dan. I won't put you on the spot just yet as to how many you expect or hope to make the evening successful or the event successful. But obviously there are a lot of ways, and we'll check back in with you later on tonight as to how to make that happen. And we'll do that before the end of the broadcast. The W5, the how and why of cannabis and throughout the years. Jehna, please, if you could explain again or start and give us highlights as to your perspective on that.
So cannabis as, cannabis has been around for a long, long time. And in, as you know, in 2018, it was legal for recreational use. It's actually been legal for medical use for several years. And I do have a little presentation to go through that will explain a little bit about what cannabis is. I'm not going to get too much into how it works, but just a little bit about what it is, and some facts to give people a bit better understanding of kind of what we're dealing with here, because cannabis has been something that's been around for a very, very long time. But a lot of people don't really know anything about it because, and the reason for that is because of prohibition. So now that that's ended, I really feel strongly that it's very important to talk about it, to give people, you know, facts about what exactly that we're dealing with, because it's something that is widely used in Canada. Even before it was regulated, I think in 2016, there was a poll that estimated there was about 5 million people using cannabis in Canada before it was legalized. And all of that was coming from black market sources. So unregulated sources, generally grows that were hidden away from the public in conditions that weren't necessarily always sanitary, weren't always healthy, weren't always safe. So now we've reached a point where it's much more widely available. So I'm going to cover a little bit about cannabis, a bit of the history, and make some comparisons. What's the difference? What are the benefits of having a regulated market? I'm going to do a little bit of comparing alcohol to cannabis, just so that because we already have a very widely accepted regulated substance that's used very, very commonly in Canada. How did the two compare, just to give an idea of what we're dealing with? Some myths and facts about the product, who uses cannabis, and some details about what to expect. What does having a cannabis store in your town actually mean? What's it going to look like? And we're going to talk a bit about the regulations surrounding cannabis. So for those who don't know what I mean, when I mean cannabis sativa is actually a flowering plant that a lot of people are really familiar with the traditional cannabis leaf symbol, but most people don't know it's not actually the leaves that are consumed. It's actually the flower of the plant that's consumed. Now, cannabis is a very, very complex product, a very complex plant. There are over 100 cannabinoids. Cannabinoids are the active components in cannabis. So they're the components that actually react with our bodies when we consume it. Many people have heard of CBD, has gotten a lot of press in the last few years. It's a non-intoxicating compound. So CBD in a cannabis plant, when it's consumed, has effects on the body and on the mind, but it's not an intoxicating effect. THC is the cannabinoid that gives that intoxicating effect and the high that some people search for. CBD is known very well on the medical side because it does have a lot of medical uses without giving people that intoxicated feeling. There's also chemical compounds called terpenes, which are found in all sorts of plants. They're what give plants their distinctive smells. So lemons smell like lemons because of terpenes. Cannabis also has a lot of these compounds, and those compounds also react with our bodies. And the reason that I want to just talk about this briefly is because there's a really, cannabis is very complex. There's a lot of different types of cannabis strains and a lot of different types of cannabis products, and all those cannabis products can have different effects on the body. So it's not just a different brands of a product that's going to do the same thing for everybody. There's a lot of different products with different effects out there for people who are looking for. Some people use cannabis for medical purposes, so to get rid of pain and nausea. Some people will use cannabis for its intoxicating effect. Some people use cannabis because they enjoy music or food or movies better when they use it. Some people use it to relax, to relieve anxiety, depression. There's a lot of different reasons that people use it. And for that reason, there's a lot of different products out there. And that's also one of the reasons that the education is really, really important, because someone's never tried it before, they're going to walk into a store. It's really important that the people who work in the industry, work in the stores, are knowledgeable about the products that they sell. And when you're getting cannabis from an unregulated source, they have no knowledge about the product they're selling. They don't necessarily have any knowledge about how it's going to work and what it's going to do for people. So having that regulated source can help people to use the product much more responsibly, much more effectively, and with a really big reduction of harm, because there's the knowledge about the products behind it. So that's a really, really important factor in the regulated cannabis industry. So cannabis is something that has been used for thousands of years. There are records thousands of years old of societies using cannabis for all sorts of purposes. Very commonly used for things like for rope, seeds, food, but also used in spiritual rituals, used medically in China and Africa. We've got records that are probably 5,000 to 6,000 years old of it being used in Egypt, in China. So hemp, which is just a form of cannabis sativa that doesn't have any THC, any intoxicating compounds, is very, very versatile. It can be used for fuel, for seed, for food, for fabric. Cannabis was actually widely used until around 1914. In the States, the Harrison Act was passed, and that started the prohibition of drugs in the US. And in the 20s, cannabis was added to the Opium and Narcotics Control Act. This was, unfortunately, because of the time that this was happening, this was very racially motivated. You can really get into the politics of it, which are very, very interesting, and especially considering all the issues that are going on today. But it was very, very racially motivated against Mexican immigrants that were coming in, against Black people in the country, in the States. They really pushed cannabis as being this dangerous drug that was used by Mexicans and Black musicians to corrupt white society. Very little of it was based in fact, and what I find was really interesting is cannabis was very common in most people's medicine cabinets. The US Pharmacopoeia was full of cannabis-based products that were used for all sorts of medical issues. And when the Harrison Act was passed, they actually didn't really call it cannabis. They called it marijuana. Marijuana was the Mexican word for cannabis. And a lot of people who were voting against marijuana use didn't realize that the product that they were prohibiting was the same product that was in their grandmother's medicine cabinet and their great-grandmother's medicine cabinet for generations and generations. They didn't know that. They just saw this was the demon marijuana that was going to corrupt all their white women. And that's how this was passed. There isn't even any actual records as to why cannabis was included in the Canadian prohibition. It just was, probably because of the influence from the States at the time. But recreational use, it still continued. The cannabis market went underground, and recreational use became even more common in the 60s and 70s. There was a lot of harm done by prohibition. And one thing that I thought was really interesting when there was the talks about legalization happened, and a lot of people were saying, well, cannabis is so much more potent now than it used to be in the 60s. And that's totally true. And the only reason that actually happened is because of prohibition, because people were trying to transport and create more and more potent drugs. That was because of the black market. So hopefully with legalization now, we're able to kind of modify people's use and make people more aware that you don't need the most potent product out there to be able to enjoy the product. So cannabis is actually in Canada one of the most widely used drugs after alcohol, and worldwide probably the most commonly used drug. And then you get to today in modern times. So the medical cannabis was actually sort of what spurred this movement for legalization. So in 2001, the Canadian government created the MMAR because it did recognize that cannabis was a valid medical treatment for many disorders. That was upgraded to the MMPR just to allow people to have more access to cannabis. And then in 2018, it all fell under the Cannabis Act. I think we've gone backwards instead of forwards on the slides. There we go. Okay. So we'll get into a little bit of the black market versus the regulated market. So yes, according to Stats Canada, over 4 million cannabis users over the age of 15, and that was in 2014. So that was 4 years before regulation, and that number was up to 5 million users in 2018 before it was legalized. So a lot of people were already using this product. So the unregulated market definitely, as I just mentioned, encourages creating more and more potent drugs. If you have a, an illegal substance that, you're going to go to prison for a longer time based on how much you have, you want a more potent product in a smaller package to reduce those risks for the people who are growing and selling it. Unregulated market, black market dealers do not care if you have ID, if you're 17 or 16 or 23, they're not checking IDs, they will sell to whomever has money. So that definitely makes the product more available to young people. They just have to know the right people. As I mentioned too, the regulated market definitely has a strong focus on educating its customers, educating the public. That is probably one of the most important things. And I don't say that just because that's my job at the company, but definitely a top priority for the cannabis industry as a whole. Quality and safety of products. As I mentioned, the medical market that started back in 2001 has been overseen by Health Canada, and the regulations for quality and safety of products were very, very large, especially because we were dealing with sick people, people who had, little to no immune system, for example. We don't want to make a product available to people that's going to make them more sick when they're already sick. And once legalization came to be, they just took those same quality standards from the medical market and applied them to the recreational market. So the products that are on the recreational market, they go through very, very rigorous safety and quality control testing. And if a product isn't up to standard, it's not going out. So things like mold and bacteria, those are all strictly controlled so that you know that a product in the legal market doesn't have any mold, any bacteria, anything that's going to be damaging to people's health. And above all, regulated market allows for research. This is super important because while cannabis is actually one of the most widely researched plants in the world, there's still so much that we don't know about how it works and in what capacity. So there's so many possibilities for what cannabis can be doing on the medical side. It's really been amazing what I've seen in the last 5 years of the advancements that have come and the different types of treatments and the different types of diseases and disorders that can be treated with cannabis. So the research is really, really exciting. As I mentioned, there's hundreds of different chemical compounds in cannabis, and we only know what a few of them really do and are really capable of. So so that's really exciting on the research side to find out what this plant is capable of. So a little bit of alcohol versus cannabis comparison. So this is information I found on drugabuse.com. Alcohol definitely is top of the list when it comes to causing the most harm when it's abused, whether it's hurting the individual or the individual hurting others. I had done a similar presentation like this, and they'd asked me, could you talk a little bit about cannabis, alcohol-related crime versus cannabis-related crime? And when I Googled what was alcohol-related crime, it was a lot of violent crimes. Domestic violence was high up on top of the list. When I Googled cannabis-related crimes, the only thing that came up was the unregulated sale and growing of cannabis products. was the only cannabis related crime I could find, but there was definitely a lot of evidence to support the violence that accompanies alcohol use. In most cases, drinking alcohol is not life-threatening, but if you consume too much alcohol, it can be fatal. But in comparison, there are no actual official recorded deaths of cannabis by cannabis use. So the fatal dosage of THC is so high that it can't actually reasonably be consumed. I think you would need, they estimated you'd have to smoke about 15 pounds of cannabis in 15 minutes to achieve a fatal dose, which would be quite impossible. And even then, that was research that was done on animal studies. And in actuality, it was smoke inhalation that killed the animals and not actual THC use. As far as edible cannabis, they estimated you'd need probably about 100 pounds of cannabis consumed edibly at one sitting to be a fatal dose. So while there are definitely, I mean, cannabis is a drug and it doesn't come without risks, there is definitely, they haven't been able to establish a fatal dosage of cannabis. And that's because there are no cannabis receptors in the part of your brain that regulates your heart rate and your breathing. So no matter how much cannabis you have, it's not going to affect those particular systems in a fatal way. Alcohol has been shown to play a large role in criminal activities and violence. Excessive drinking lowers inhibitions, impairs judgment, and definitely can increase the risk of aggressive behavior. And we've seen this over and over the years. Cannabis does not have those same effects. As far as addictiveness, 15% of people who use alcohol develop a dependency, and 6 people die from alcohol poisoning every day. Only 9% of people who use cannabis develop a dependency. There's never been a reported case of someone overdosing on cannabis alone. So there's definitely a bit more safety from a cannabis user compared to an alcohol or never mind getting into things like heroin or cocaine, but alcohol is something that we see every day, and it definitely has its dangers and drawbacks. A few myths that I'd like to dispel. So there's been a lot of talk in the past. I grew up thinking cannabis is a gateway drug. Actual studies done on this has shown that cannabis use does not normally lead to using other harder drugs. Most of the people, in my own personal experience, most people who have started using cannabis have actually reduced their dependency on other drugs, including alcohol, prescription painkillers. So tobacco and alcohol are actually proven to be actual gateway drugs. Cannabis has been proven over and over again not to. Marijuana is natural, so it's harmless and not addictive. This is another myth that's going around. As I just said, marijuana is natural. Yes, that is definitely true. But it is a drug, so there are always cautions. Nothing is harmless. So it can definitely have an effect on a person's health or a person's life. Some people say, oh, it's just habitual, it's just addictive in your mind, it's not physically addictive. While marijuana does actually have a very low incidence of dependency, as I said, 9% of people can become dependent on it to the point where it becomes a problem in their life. So we do need to be aware of that. And that's another reason that I think the education is really important, because if people do have problems with cannabis use, we need to have the research and the knowledge there on how to deal with that and how to help those people. Cannabis causes cancer. That's one that that definitely has not been proven. In fact, there have been several studies. There's a really big study done in the States back in the 80s to prove that cannabis caused lung cancer. Those results were actually not very, they were kind of hard to find at first because the study showed quite definitively that cannabis use does not increase your risk of lung cancer. There have been a lot of stories in the news, preliminary studies showing that cannabis can kill cancer cells. Those are all very, very early stage research. But again, that's why we need this to be opened up. One of the biggest reasons about legalization was, we need to know about and be able to do research on these things. But cannabis causing cancer is something that has been disproven in most studies. Prohibiting cannabis use does not protect youth from the harms of drugs. Children are going to find drugs, especially teenagers. They want to experiment, they want to try things, and making these products unavailable or only available on the black market just means that teenagers are going to be going to unregulated sources, purchasing products that are unsafe. Prohibition, which we've seen from the 20s right up until now, has not managed to protect youth. However, legalized cannabis and cannabis stores and having places where adults who want to use it can go and buy it safely, it does restrict it from youth because they are not allowed in cannabis stores. So there's actually people now controlling who is purchasing cannabis, whereas before it was being sold to anybody. Just some things that I thought were really interesting, some well-known famous cannabis users: Morgan Freeman, Michael Phelps, got himself in a little bit of trouble because of his cannabis use, but there it is. Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Michael Bloomberg, New York City mayor, and Richard Branson, all very successful people who are well-known cannabis users and cannabis activists. So the image of the cannabis user being the stoner sitting on the couch eating Doritos every night is a very, very outdated stereotype that is just not at all true of most cannabis users. In fact, just today, I saw an article that said 72% of Canadian cannabis users would say that they don't fit into that stoner stereotype. They're successful, well-rounded individuals, they're parents, they have jobs, much like myself. It's not just something that is being used by young adults who are wasting their life away, smoking weed and doing very little else. That's just not, that is what you see on TV as the classic stoner stereotype, is just not the reality of cannabis users. So I found this very interesting analytic consumer study that was done in the States. So they had separated people into 3 segments of public opinion. So the consumers, so these are people who consumed cannabis products within the past 6 months. And there was the acceptors, so people who would consider consuming cannabis in the future but didn't currently consume it. And then there were rejectors, so people who would not consider consuming cannabis at all. And they found some really interesting things about these groups of people based on which group they fit into. So the average annual income among California consumers is $93,800 a year, compared to $72,800 for acceptors and $75,900 for rejectors. So overall, cannabis consumers are earning more money. They have more advanced degrees and are fully employed. So 20% of California consumers hold a master's degree, 13% of acceptors, and 12% of rejectors having a master's degree. Nearly 5 in 10 Colorado consumers are more satisfied with their life than they were a year ago, compared to 4 in 10 among acceptors and rejectors. And cannabis consumers are more likely to have children. So 64% of consumers were parents, compared to only 60% of acceptors and 55% for rejectors. And 37% of the consumers had young children under 10. Cannabis consumers were more active and social. So in Colorado, 50% of them exercise at least once a week. 36% agree that they're very social people, compared to only 21% of the acceptors and 28% of rejectors, and 25% are going out to a bar or club at least once a week. So that just kind of shows that cannabis consumers, their cannabis use has not impacted their happiness, their health, their social life, their success in their jobs, or their ability to do their jobs. The studies that are out there just show that that's simply not true, despite the kind of social stigma that's come up. Now, some of the stores, I was able to provide a few pictures. I know a lot of people were concerned about, like, what is a store going to look like? What's it going to be like to have this cannabis store? So the cannabis stores, most of the cannabis stores that are out there are actually really very nice. A lot of them have kind of gone, they wanted it to be something that's appealing for people from all walks of life. And I know for our stores in particular, when legalization happened, we wanted it to be somewhere where everyone was going to be comfortable. We wanted it to be clean and inviting. Probably at least 50% of our customers are 50 years of age or older. So it's something that we wanted to make it feel welcome and not just sort of like a dingy little store that that you're only going to see like teenagers and 20-year-olds in. We wanted it for somewhere where everyone was going to feel comfortable and where people were going to enjoy just being in the store. So hopefully we've managed to bring that across, and most of the other cannabis stores that I've seen have done a very good job of that as well. Tweed, Garden Variety, you can see everything's really out, nicely displayed. It's really actually a very nice experience in most of the stores that I've been in. Another thing that you'll notice about the cannabis stores is I know a lot of people are worried about children being able to go into stores, children being able to see into stores. Most of the stores are set up in such a way, for example, Delta 9, we've got frosted windows. So, and we've done this because of the regulations that the provincial government has imposed, that children should not be allowed to see in a store. So we'll talk a bit about the rules and regulations. And I just did want to mention, so the major regulations surrounding cannabis legalization were put in by the federal government, but the provinces were allowed to impose their own regulations on how it was sold. So the Manitoba regulations are actually very, very strict. Some of the most strict in the country. For example, in Manitoba, you have to be 19 to purchase cannabis as opposed to 18 to purchase alcohol. We are one of the only provinces, Manitoba and Quebec are the only provinces that actually went older than the legal age for alcohol. So that was one of the things that the Manitoba government thought was important for delaying use and keeping cannabis out of the hands of youth, was to make the age 19. That's another reason why, for example, you can't see into a cannabis store. A big difference between cannabis and alcohol. As a parent, I would be allowed to bring my child into the liquor store with me if I was going to buy a bottle of wine. You cannot do that in a cannabis store. Anyone under the age of 19 will not be allowed for any reason into a cannabis store. So that's something that's really important to know when it comes to having a store and the safety and security of your children. They can't even see into the store. So all the stores are either going to have frosted windows, or if there are windows, it's just looking into, sort of a lobby that is kind of has a wall that's hiding the rest of the store. So that is something that the government has imposed for that. Also, Manitoba is one of the provinces that does not allow any public consumption of cannabis. So you can't smoke or vape or consume edible cannabis in public in Manitoba. It can only be done in the privacy of your own home or on your own property. You also can't grow cannabis in Manitoba. So the federal government has said that you can have up to 4 plants per household. But has given the provinces the right to reduce that if desired. And the Manitoba government doesn't allow any recreational growth. So unless you have a medical document that's been approved by Health Canada to grow your own, that is the only way that you'd be able to grow your own cannabis here in Manitoba. And there's also a limit on how much cannabis you can carry with you out in public. Which also puts a limit on how much can be purchased in a store. So you can only have up to 30 grams of dried cannabis or equivalent of other products, whether it's oils or edibles or anything like that. So that's the limit on how much can be carried. I do like to promote some guidelines for responsible cannabis use. Obviously, the first one, the most important, is cannabis consumption for adults only. So this is just because, children's brains are really developing, not just up until they're 18, but right up into their mid-20s. And so any substance use, whether it's alcohol, cannabis, caffeine, can alter the development of children's brains. So delaying use is a really good strategy for staying healthy and keeping that healthy, safe mental health. So driving while intoxicated, whether it's by cannabis or alcohol, is obviously very irresponsible. So it's definitely ill-advised to operate a motor vehicle or any other dangerous machinery while impaired by cannabis. And set and setting. So a responsible cannabis user will consider set and setting, whether or not it is appropriate to be using cannabis in this setting, whether it's at work or wherever you are, whatever you happen to be doing, considering whether or not that's appropriate. So resisting abuse, use of cannabis to the extent that it impairs your health, your personal development or achievement is considered abuse and is to be resisted by responsible cannabis users, and also respecting the rights of others. So not everybody wants to use cannabis, and a responsible cannabis user is not going to push that onto other people. We've gone backwards again. There we go. That is that's my prepared presentation. So if there's any questions I can address.
Thank you, Jehna. Much appreciated. And it should be noted that, Jehna, you asked me to point out that you are employed by Delta 9, but Delta 9 is not considering setting up a retail establishment in Altona. So just to make sure that it's not as if you have a vested interest in this, wanted to point that out.
Exactly. I'm just here to give as much information as I can.
Chief Batchelor, I'm sure that you and your men in uniform have fielded some questions over the past number of months about cannabis. Take it away. I think we're going to need Chief Batchelor. At this particular point, you're a man of few words. We're going to need you to unmute yourself. How about that?
Okay, I thought that was being handled by the control panel. So here we go. We'll start that over again.
I'm sure you said it well.
Firstly, thank you for the opportunity to speak on this subject today, and also thank you to all of you that are tuning in. If we could put my PowerPoint up at this time, control panel's on it now. If we can go to slide 2, please. I must admit that when the entire idea of legalization of marijuana first came about, I was very concerned. I was concerned that there would be an increase in youth using cannabis. I was concerned about road safety, and I was concerned about public consumption. I can tell you that we're actually in a better place now than we were prior to legalization on all of those concerns. Next slide, please. Provincially, we have a strong legal framework that encompasses offenses around minors using cannabis or an adult who provides cannabis to a minor. You can see the fines up on the screen. A fine of $672 for a minor's consumption, and a fine of $2,500 plus for providing cannabis to a minor. Next slide. As far as road safety goes, to operate a motor vehicle while under the influence of alcohol or drugs has been illegal for a very long time. Police now have special instruments and training to deal with those suspected of driving under the effects of cannabis, and the costs of this specialized training and equipment was covered by the federal government. Next slide, please. As for my concern around public consumption, we have local bylaws and provincial statutes which cover public consumption of cannabis. And again, none of this existed prior to legalization. So prior to legalization, if officers came across someone smoking marijuana on our streets, generally they told them to destroy the joint, and really not a whole lot more was done because it took hours and hours of court prep. So now we have the efficiency of writing a ticket. Unfortunately, something that we still have after legalization is the black market or local drug dealers. Cannabis has been around for several decades. Drug dealers continue to operate in our area. Now that it is legal for a person to carry up to 30 grams, it makes things even easier for drug dealers to operate. The issue around someone purchasing off of a street corner is the unknown aspect of it with respect to the contents. This is unregulated cannabis, and you really don't know what you're buying. Whether it's home delivery cannabis, no, just stay on that last slide, please. We've had cases in our area where cannabis has been seized and laced with harder drugs such as methamphetamine or cross-contaminated. When a scale is used to weigh meth and then is used to weigh cannabis, you could have cannabis or marijuana laced with methamphetamine, fentanyl, carfentanil, making it extremely dangerous. The saying is know your source, and this refers to knowing you're purchasing pure cannabis, regulated cannabis. Next slide, please. One other community in our area that has had retail cannabis in their community for the past several years is Morden. And in speaking with Morden's police chief, he tells me that there's been no issues related to retail cannabis. And the final slide. Next slide, please. My position on legalization has changed over the years that it has taken to get where we are now. It is a legal substance and as such can now be legally purchased and consumed, hopefully in a responsible manner. We've got a rigorous enforcement regime that keeps us safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Much appreciated. We've had a number of questions and people have been supplying their questions in advance. And so thank you to those who have chosen to do that. Feel free to continue to send questions. We will fit them in. I will now pose some questions for our panel of experts. And I will ask you in advance to, at this particular point, keep your questions short, answer short. I'd like to ensure that anyone who submitted a question has it answered by someone on our panel. So Dan, let's start with some how-tos for you. If the town votes no, is that long withstanding, or would a store still be, or I guess would that store or question be possible in the future? You're gonna have to turn on your mic.
Yep. If the community votes to prohibit this local sale of cannabis in Altona, the Liquor, Gaming, and Cannabis Control Act does provide for a method to repeal or reverse the prohibition. So a second plebiscite could be held at a future date, and it could be initiated by a resolution of council or by another petition, but it can't happen any earlier than 1 year before the next voting day, or no later than 90 days before the next voting day. So from this point forward, it can only happen every 4 years at the same time as an election. And the same two requirements are in place. It has to be 20% of eligible voters petitioning, or a resolution of council calling for the question. So essentially, the question can come up again every 4 years on election day. So the earliest it could come up again would be October of 2022.
Dan, this question from a recent resident, why do you have to be a resident of Altona for 6 months to be eligible? And this is a question from someone who moved to the community on July 1st.
Yeah, and it's the same rules in place for any municipal election. The Municipal Councils and School Boards Elections Act establishes who is eligible to vote in an election or on a question. Same rules apply. So currently the act requires a resident to have resided in the municipality for at least 6 months prior to the date of a vote on a question or an election.
Okay, thank you, Dan. And Jehna, back to you. What sort of products would be available if a shop opened? For example, topical pain relief, or can you give just a bit of a shopping list as to what's in the stores?
We have all sorts of products. So definitely there are some topical products. So topical creams, edibles, drinkables, dried cannabis, oils and capsules are also available. So there's a big range of products. A lot of it depends on what's available through LGCA at any one time. So topical creams are fairly recent. So we don't always have them in stock in all the stores, but they are available out there on the market for those stores who wish to stock them. So there's a wide range.
Okay, and for the people who are working in the stores, are they educated to know how the various doses and varieties work? Are they order takers? Are they experts? Or what kind of background do these staff members have?
Well, that depends on the store. As I mentioned, our company puts a really big, we find the education very important. So I train our staff. They're very knowledgeable. Most of the stores that I've gone into, they're going to know things about how to establish dosage. They're going to know what kind of effects you can expect from different products. So there's every store that I've gone into, there's people there who know what the products are, how they work, and how to kind of advise their customers on the different products and the different ways of using.
Okay. Chief Batchelor, you, in your presentation, you made reference to the bylaws and driving under the influence and all of that. What does a cannabis intoxication test look like? There's a tough word right there. Is it as simple as breathing into a machine like a breathalyzer? I know you indicated they've been supplied by the federal government.
Great question, and thanks for asking. So in our police service and across Canada now, we have what are known as SFSTs, which is Standard Field Sobriety Testers. Our officers are all trained in that. So if you think back to the old days of walking the line and touching your nose, that is sort of what goes on the street. We also have an instrument known as the oral fluid screening device, which is a saliva test. And that test will tell you if you're driving under the influence of cannabis or cocaine.
And this is, I guess, related to personal experience in dealing with the public, but what is it like, and this question, and you can elaborate, Chief Batchelor, what is it like attending a call when someone is high on cannabis? Would you like to see more calls where more people are high?
Well, thanks for the question. And as police officers, we really don't get to pick and choose. So we attend the calls calls for service that we are called to. Of course, we would love to attend calls where there is no intoxicants involved, but that's just not reality. As Jehna spoken of in her presentation, cannabis is actually a bit of a depressant. So alcohol-fueled rage, we see that. With cannabis, I'm not going to say that there's no big deal. Every file, every call has its own areas that we have to be concerned about. But cannabis, generally speaking, is more of a depressant than alcohol.
Okay, thanks, Chief Batchelor. Dan, let's target this to you. This seems like a bit of a comment, but you can expand on it anyway. It is by law that we're required to have a community vote for a cannabis store in Altona. But when we've had various drugstores set up in the community, there's never been a community vote. Cannabis is legal and can be beneficial to certain autoimmune diseases. Cannabis, alcohol, tobacco are all harmful to the body if used in excess amounts. Again, if people want to consume, they're going to drive out of the community. This will stop them from shopping locally. According to this particular question asker, Altona needs people to shop within the community to grow. Do you want to respond to that or give your take on that as well?
Yeah, so the original, I guess, question was, is it required? Why is it required by law, or why are we having community vote? So the Liquor, Gaming, and Cannabis Control Act, was passed by the provincial government, and that's the legislation that provides for the opportunity for communities to have a say on the local sale of not only cannabis but liquor and video lottery gaming. The plebiscite is a binding decision, and it creates the obligation on the Liquor, Gaming, and Cannabis Authority to not issue a license in a community that has decided that they don't want either video gaming, alcohol, or cannabis sales in their community. So I guess it's out of respect of personal preferences of certain communities, whether or not they don't want certain substances or activities within their jurisdiction, that the Act provides that ability. So that's why we're having a vote, because the legislation allows for community say on cannabis. That's why we're all here trying to promote some awareness about the decision and trying to get people out to vote.
Here's a question. Can you please give some reasons why you want a cannabis store in Altona? Now, and I'll answer that on behalf of council. I'm not sure if want is the right word, but rather we're certainly not opposed. And council's feeling at the time when we made the original decision and approved the location for the store was that we were in favor of growth. We were in favor of additional jobs. We were in favor of empty retail spaces being filled. We were on side with safety and regulation, and we felt all of that contributed to the reason to say yes to a cannabis store in Altona. So in short strokes, that's why we said yes. I'd also like to add in terms of safety, As a community, we can all have a role in being educated about substances. Just as with alcohol or tobacco, retailers, schools, parents all have responsibilities around education. When we're talking about a licensed retail cannabis store, something to keep in mind, of course, that individuals under 19 are not allowed to set foot in the store. Excuse me. So anyway, there was also a question about cannabis psychosis. We don't have someone who is a professional in that respect, but could someone elaborate on that?
I've done a little bit of research into it. It has come up in the research that I've done. Cannabis-induced psychosis is something, first of all, psychosis is and schizophrenia are something that affect about 1% of the Canadian population. And the studies that have been done on it have shown that there can be a link between cannabis use and psychosis and schizophrenia. However, it is very, very unclear, even with all the research that's been done, that is a causal link. A lot of the research can be interpreted as people who have mental health issues are often self-medicating with cannabis. So there's a lot of research to be done on that, and the research that has been done has been very, very inconclusive. However, most medical professionals will, will recommend that if a person does have a family history of psychosis or schizophrenia, or any genetic disorder that might make them more susceptible to that they have refrained from cannabis and other drug use. But there is no studies, no research, no evidence that using cannabis on a regular basis is suddenly going to create schizophrenia or psychosis in someone who doesn't really have any risk for that happening. Overconsumption of cannabis can result during the cannabis use in hallucinations or other sort of disassociation from reality. But that's generally with very, very frequent and very, very heavy use. So it's something that the cannabis industry is aware of, but it's not really a very prevalent problem. It's definitely sounds very scary, but it's not something that is commonly happening with people who are using cannabis in moderation.
Jehna, one more time, kind of put you on the spot here in terms of how familiar you are with the business in the province. How many cannabis retailers are currently operating in the province? And this listener also is curious as it relates to Winnipeg and what we might consider rural Manitoba.
I was looking at that. So we have 18 different cannabis stores here in Winnipeg. And then there are 8 small towns that have 1 or 2 stores. And then there's 6 in Brandon. So there's quite a few stores across the province already. And definitely in some small towns as well. I do know of a lot of people who live outside of Winnipeg who come into Winnipeg for their cannabis purchases. Again, as I think it was you already mentioned, Mayor Friesen, or perhaps it was Dan, that these people could be spending their money and shopping, in their own hometowns if that was available. So,
Jehna, one more for you, and this kind of relates to the business model of a retail cannabis store. How many jobs, perhaps, would the typical location generate? Perhaps what are the general incomes of these jobs, or said another way, are these minimum wage jobs, which are still important, or perhaps skilled labor similar to a pharmacist?
Well, no, I wouldn't say that they were skilled labor. Definitely more, retail store positions, retail managers. I will say, though, that the cannabis industry across the country does pay quite significantly higher. So they're not minimum wage jobs. I know, at least for our company and for most of the companies that I've spoken to, we don't pay our retail staff minimum wage. We pay significantly above minimum wage. And that seems to be the trend in the cannabis industry in general. But yeah, not skilled positions, just mostly retail positions when it comes to the stores.
Okay, thank you. And Dan, this particular one from our Altona District Chamber of Commerce, which speaks on behalf of our community's businesses. Where would the town realize direct increased tax revenues, and And what could those revenues add to our community? Is it business tax or property tax, or can you elaborate on that, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, any one retail outlet's it's not gonna be a windfall for, on the tax front, but, if a new retail establishment were opened, the potential annual business taxes would be in the hundreds of dollars. And then in addition to that, the potential annual property taxes, they might be in the thousands of dollars. Like I said, it all depends on, the assessed value of the property, whether the retailer opened a new property or was just operating within the existing property. The impact on municipal tax revenues would not be that great. I think the greater economic benefit here of any type of retail outlet operating in Altona is just the employment and then the service rendered to the community, having that product available or that extra service within your own community. I think those are the issues that council focused on when evaluating this decision. It wasn't just tax revenue generation, it was just the greater economic benefit to the community.
Chief Batchelor, this perhaps relates to your relationship with the chief of the city of Morden, whether he has shared this with you, but the question from someone listening is, do you feel that having the retail store will help cut down on people buying it illegally? Your thoughts on that?
Well, I certainly hope so. I don't think you're ever going to totally obliterate the black market or drug dealers. I think, unfortunately, they have the ability to undercut very often the price that you pay for unregulated cannabis. But again, the big problem is, and the big concern is, you really don't know what you're buying. Very often, a drug dealer will tell you they know exactly what their product is, but I can tell you that we have sent marijuana away to be analyzed, and we have got the results back that there was a mixture of marijuana and methamphetamine. So you really, if you're consuming marijuana, you definitely don't want to be consuming methamphetamine if your intention was to consume cannabis.
Jehna, a little bit about the shopping experience, and perhaps relates to our community. What would a store do to ensure privacy for the individuals who want to shop there? And the next question, do stores offer free delivery for privacy, since using cannabis can be stigmatized in a community?
Absolutely. Well, as far as, maintaining a person's privacy, if you are in a store, the other people in the store are obviously going to see you. But all cannabis stores do take cash. It's still strongly cash-driven business. And one of those reasons is because people might not be comfortable using a bank card or a credit card for privacy reasons. There is also, I know within Winnipeg, we have a same-day delivery service. However, that is only for the area of Winnipeg. But you can go online, for example, to the Delta 9 website or to a Tweed website and order your cannabis online and have it delivered via, I think it's Pure Later or Canada Post. Both will deliver through the mail. So that option is available to people outside of Winnipeg as well. So you don't have to be going into a cannabis store to be able to obtain it. But it definitely, the convenience obviously is there. If you do order it, if you're outside of Winnipeg, I don't think you're going to be able to find same day delivery unless, the store feels that it is, financially able to do so. But so far we've only had, there's one company, a delivery service, Pineapple Express, but they only operate within Winnipeg.
I think we've touched on this earlier, but the question is posed, have other local communities seen an increase in foot traffic when retail cannabis was made available? Now, in an urban setting, it may not be possible to track that, Jehna, but for some of the smaller centers where you've spoken to the business operators.
That I don't know, but I do know, like I said, from experience and from speaking to customers in the stores, that there are people from outside of Winnipeg coming to do their shopping here for that reason. So I would imagine that it definitely would increase foot traffic if people don't have to leave their town to be able to purchase it.
Okay, and maybe one more time, we touched on it a little bit earlier. Let's go back to the safety issue. The question was asked and can probably be restated by you again. What are the safety measures the community is going to put in place to keep our young population educated about risks and dangers? And what are the risks and dangers? And maybe if you want to give your background on that, and then perhaps I'll jump in with the perspective of the town of Altona.
Well, the towns themselves, I mean, the cannabis stores, we do provide education to all sorts of communities. I've been asked to speak in businesses, in 55+ communities. When it comes to children, I haven't had the opportunity to speak in schools yet, but I have advised some police officers who were engaged to speak about drugs and cannabis use in schools. So the education is getting out there, and we are trying. It's a little bit limited now with COVID and not being able to do as many public engagements, but just to be able to speak to people and advise on, you know, how to talk to your kids about cannabis. So that education is getting out there, and I'm more than happy to talk to anybody who's interested in passing on that information to children, to parents. That's definitely available. And there's no cost for that, at least not from our end. I don't know about other educators out there, but that is available. And the more the research comes in, and the more, you know, the stigma reduces, the more that's become available to people.
Put on your mom hat for just a minute again. Is the province doing a good enough job in expressing the concerns, or at least the potential dangers of cannabis?
I think it is getting better. You know, my kids have often, you know, every year they come home and they say, oh, they talked to us about drugs at school today. And there have been some things that concerned me, but, you know, it seems to be getting better. It's a lot less fear-based and a lot more just making information available to children. I think that fear-based, just say no to drugs. It's been shown for many, many years to be ineffective for children. So I think having it out there, having it be something that people can talk about, that parents don't have to hide from their kids, because a lot of parents, you know, maybe feel they don't want to have those uncomfortable conversations. But now that it's out there, I think that it's more important, and parents have access to information. What do I say? How do I say it? What, you know, what's appropriate at what age group? Those kind of things are becoming more and more available. So it's getting better, definitely.
Chief Batchelor, for those who stop by your headquarters here in the Civic Center, your front window's full of signs about expressing caution or concern with regards to cannabis use as a community. I mean, I think you generally prefer to interact with people in a less formal setting than when you are enforcing bylaws. How can we do this as a community better and moving forward?
We have actually been doing these types of lectures for many, many years prior to legalization. Obviously, the messaging shifted somewhat as cannabis became legal. It's all about responsible consumption now. It's all about, especially with the edibles, we really want to make kids aware that a chocolate bar isn't only a chocolate bar anymore. We also want to make parents aware that if they have edibles in their residence, they should be locked in a cupboard. Also, if you have pets in your house, you shouldn't be leaving your cannabis laying around. There has been some significantly ill dogs that have had to get trips to the vet. So that education piece, unfortunately, I'm not exactly sure if we're going to be getting our Ag Safety Days this year or not, but for the past several years, we've had the opportunity to attend Ag Safety Days, where we have about 150 grade 5s attend. And like I say, our messaging changed a fair bit upon legalization, but we have been involved in community safety around drugs, alcohol, you know, don't drink and drive, and all those things for many years.
Okay, thank you. For those who have tuned in, thanks. If you weren't there at the beginning of the program, let me highlight again our panel of industry experts. Chief Administrative Officer Dan Gagné, Police Chief Perry Batchelor, who serves as the Chief of the Altona Police Service, and a manager of training and education at Delta 9 Cannabis, Jehna Grobety. And I thank all three of you for sharing your evening, and I thank those of you who have tuned in to find out more. As we've been indicating, this is a conversation about cannabis. Our community is facing a plebiscite in about a month's time, and our intention was to go into that particular exercise well-informed and ready to make a decision for the future of our community. We should point out as well to those who triggered the plebiscite and circulated the petition, an invitation was extended as well to join us for tonight's conversation, and they chose not to do so. So we respect that as well. But in the meantime, we do have an opportunity for us to exercise our democratic right as those of us who live in Altona and call our community home. Dan, I'm going to get you to again get the Coles Notes version of what we should do on October 14th. If you could, please, Dan.
Yeah, well, I mean, the first step is go to our website, altona.ca. All the information I've shared tonight is we've laid it out logically on the website. It's very few steps involved. The first one is to find out if you're eligible to vote. Again, you got to be 18 years old, a Canadian citizen, and you either must have lived in Altona for at least 6 months prior to October 14th, or you're a registered owner of property in the town of Altona for the past 6 months. So if you qualify based on those requirements, then I would suggest then you register to vote. Make sure you're on the voters list. If you've just moved in the last year or you've just turned 18, and it just doesn't, our electors list isn't always perfect. It's always a good idea to just double check. It makes your life easier when you do show up to a poll and then you have to wait that extra few minutes as we get things ironed out. If you don't have to be on the list, you can still be added to the list on the day of the election. It just cuts down on the time involved when you do show up to vote. Like I said, there will be 4 different options. You can show up on election day at the Rhineland Pioneer Center between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. to vote in person. There will be mobile polls across the community at 9 different locations. You can check the locations and times and specific locations within the facilities. If you're in those facilities, there should be posters somewhere in your residence. Look out for those, and the details will be there for you. But we have that available on our website. You can vote in advance on October 8th. Come into the Civic Center between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. We will have a poll there. Please remember, whenever you show up for a voting opportunity, to have your ID. We need some photo ID to confirm you are the person on our electors list, and that the ID should also show your residential address to prove that you are a resident of Altona. And the final option is to vote by sealed ballot. Like we said, COVID-19 really threw us a curveball this year. We were supposed to have the plebiscite earlier in the year, but due to COVID, we elected to delay that until we found out more about the coronavirus and how we could do this more safely. We're confident we can do that now. So we will proceed with the vote on October 14th. If you're not comfortable coming in person, you can apply to vote by sealed ballot. You can do so by mail, by email, by fax. You can call in and request a ballot. We will require you to prove that you're a resident. We'll need some pieces of ID. We'll need some proof. So another option is to come in person. You can get the sealed ballot. You can fill it out right away, hand it back in. That way you don't have to worry about delivering it on voting day. Otherwise, like I said, you apply by mail. We'll mail the ballot back to you, and then you'll have some time to send them the ballot back by mail. You can apply in writing until October 2nd. After that date, you'll have to arrange for delivery options so that we can get the ballot to you quickly enough so you can return it by the voting day on October 14th. So there's several options available. We're trying to eliminate any excuse people may have to not go out and vote. Like I said before, we're going through a significant amount of effort and expense to put this on. We really want to see a high voter turnout. We were pleased with the last election. We were in the high 40%, which is good for a municipal election. We'd love to be somewhere in that neighborhood this time around. It is an important issue, important enough for 20% of the people to circulate a petition. I think it'd be fair to get at least another 20%, get the other side of the conversation showing up to vote, and then the community can really have a fair say on this important question.
Thank you, Dan. And as our community CAO, I know that you would point out that this is done at considerable expense, and that we want to ensure that there's a good response to that.
Yep.
And that with your stern teacher's voice to say that let's all come out on October 14th and help make that decision clear for our community.
That's right.
We have a number of, and again, thanks to those of you who listened so far, I've challenged our panel to do a wrapper-upper. So Chief Batchelor, I know as you said, you've had this conversation many times over the past number of years. Your thoughts on the question ahead of us, and perhaps your perspective on a cannabis retail operation in Altona.
Well, I think that what we're going through right now is what people went through when prohibition on alcohol changed. We're now going through the end of the prohibition on cannabis. Cannabis is a legal substance. It can be consumed legally if you meet the requirements of the age limit and you use it responsibly. Don't smoke, drink, and drive. Please go slow with edibles. That's another saying that's out there. Start with the low THC and go slow. That stuff apparently can catch up with you. So again, the prohibition on cannabis is over. It's a legal substance. The opportunity to have a retail store in our community has probably more pros than cons. Again, if we had no intoxicants, there's a good possibility you may need no police. So it's not as though we welcome intoxicants, but we hope that people that want to partake in it do so in a responsible manner and can enjoy another substance. And that's about all I got to say, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Chief Batchelor. Appreciate your perspective. Jehna, if you could, from your perspective as someone who has worked closely in the industry for the past number of years and was also part of the Niverville conversation where they ultimately had a plebiscite and ultimately chose to proceed with a yes vote, perhaps if you could apply that to our situation here in Altona.
Well, I think there's definitely, as we've already spoken about, benefits, economic and social benefits to having a cannabis store available in Altona. One thing that actually didn't come up, but I did want to mention, one of the benefits that communities have found, especially they've done hundreds and hundreds of studies of this in the states where states have been legalizing cannabis, is they have found that having cannabis stores in a community has actually increased home prices and home values because the community is seen as being more forward thinking. And so that's one of the other benefits that actually didn't come up about besides the taxes and stuff. So there are really a lot of benefits. And I think having that there, letting people, have access to the education, to the information, to reduce the stigma around cannabis use is very, very important. And I did want to back up what Chief Batchelor said about edibles and proceeding slowly and with caution when using edibles. One of the biggest things most people don't know, it can take up to 2 hours for a dose of edibles to kick in for you to be able to feel the effects. That's where a lot of people have problems, is they'll take a dose and then they'll be like, oh, this isn't working after half an hour, and have another. And that's where those edibles can hit very hard and be a bit problematic. So if there's anything that people learn from this tonight, it takes 2 hours for edible cannabis to kick in. Please keep that in mind. But yeah, there are definitely some benefits and some good for the community. And we've seen very, very little negative feedback from any of the communities who've opened a cannabis store. So
Thank you for your perspective. And on behalf of Town Council, I should point out that we, as in our role as Town Council, we take direction from the community through surveys, and they allows us to take a pulse of the community and still make a decision. This is a little bit different. The fact that we are having a vote means that the results will stick. So we are saying yes, or we're saying no. As I've indicated earlier, our council was pro in terms of a retail cannabis operation in Altona, and remain that to this day. However, we certainly respect the fact that people have an opinion and have an opportunity to vote. So I think if tonight we're successful, it would result in more people knowing about the situation, feeling comfortable to make a decision, and then making that decision on October 14th. I should point out that the video will be up a little later on in full, and we hope that you'll share it with your family and friends, those who are not able to watch along live. And we will also share bits of it as well on our town Facebook page and website. And the important thing is October 14th. That's the voting day. And as Dan Gagné indicated, there are a variety of ways in which you can participate. A sincere thank you to Chief Perry Batchelor, Jehna Grobety of Delta 9, and at Town of Altona CAO for your perspectives tonight. It would not be possible without your voices around the table. And of course, to those of you who chose to join us as well. Thanks again. We appreciate your interest, and we look forward to hearing the results on October 14th.